Learn the secrets of success. Exclusive insights and information from the experts. Tag Radio. Ready to let your mind go wherever technology leads? Then tag, you're it. Tag Radio. Here today. Imagine tomorrow. Home to 9 major academic divisions, numerous centers for advanced study, and a host of prestigious affiliated institutions, Emory University encompasses a graduate school of arts and sciences, professional schools of medicine, theology, law, nursing, public health, and business. A destination university internationally recognized as an inquiry-driven, ethically engaged, and diverse community whose members work collaboratively for positive transformation through courageous leadership. And at the helm of this world-class institution, shaping education for the 21st century, is an award-winning teacher, scientist, and author of more than 115 publications, Emory University President Dr. James Wagner. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, September 18th, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. From its impact on economic development in Atlanta and across Georgia to its innovations in biotech, computing, and healthcare, Emory University has become synonymous with leadership and education. In this edition of Tech Talk, Tino speaks with Emory President James Wagner, degrees in electrical engineering, a master's degree in clinical engineering, and a PhD degree in materials science and engineering. Dr. Wagner has had a distinguished tenure on the faculty of Johns Hopkins University and served as Dean, Provost, and Interim President of Case Western Reserve University. He became the 19th President of Emory on September 1st, 2003. Since that day, President Wagner has set in motion a campus-wide initiative to develop a clear vision to enhance the independent education experience of undergraduates, growth research, and fostering partnerships between academia and local institutions, government, and industry, with a firm devotion to the ancient university mission of liberal education, which he defines as mastering a discipline and developing a thirst for new knowledge. Tino speaks with Emory University President Dr. James Wagner.
Dr. Wagner, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Tino.
We have a lot of listeners that certainly have degrees in the engineering area, and I see you have a degree from University of Delaware and a master's in clinical engineering from Johns Hopkins, and then an advanced degree in engineering as well. What was your inspiration to get into engineering?
I've enjoyed 2 dimensions of engineering. One is the problem-solving dimension, but the other is the challenge that we've enjoyed in recent decades of bringing technology and people together. So unlike perhaps the very earliest times in engineering where engineering practice was sort of separate from social and health kinds of issues, the newer engineering engagement with people was also an important attraction.
Our organization, Technology Association of Georgia, is beginning to put more time and energy into getting kids excited about math, science, technology, and engineering. And like you, we've been reading some alarming information regarding American children particularly, and I think the lack of numbers in terms of going into these fields. In fact, I read something recently that said 70% of parents feel their kids are taking enough or too much math in high school.
Oh, my goodness.
So do you have any thoughts about that, what we need to do as a country and as universities, I know, are working on this as well? How do we get kids back into this?
Well, I think it requires a broad effort. I had an opportunity to speak last spring to a journalism group. Actually, it was here on campus. And we made the observation together there that there was even a role for journalism. I don't know as our issue begins with trying to get more science and math and engineering into our curriculum, but rather building a desire and an interest in that more broadly. We all recall, well, unfortunately, all of us old enough recall when science and technology was dinner table talk, particularly in the early days of the space race.
Right.
and that one of the wonderful things that journalists did for us at that time was work very hard to distill wonderfully complex, deeply complex science and engineering concepts to ideas that all of us could get our heads around. So we sat at the dinner table and we knew that a LEM was a lunar excursion module, Since that time, I think we've given ourselves too much excuse not to have a broad social discussion and interest in science and technology. We've adopted phrases like, well, gee, that's brain surgery, or that's rocket science. And that's sort of our American excuse for laughing off the fact that we really have sort of lost touch, not with the uses of technology, but with the fundamentals of science. I think it's a broad challenge for our schools at all levels, and I think, as I said, and even for our communications and journalistic components of society.
Well, I think programs like First Robotics and other experiential learning has to be, in keeping with your theme, that's things I'm sure that you believe in that have to
Absolutely, and we know for very youngest people that certain kinds of science and technology are wonderfully fascinating. Whether or not you enjoy these movies, but or the toys associated with the Transformers, where through technology, robotics is shown to take a bunch of different forms. I think rekindling that sort of thing and working hard to make it as accessible as possible will bring back an appetite and an understanding for why fundamentals of science and math will make us more conversant and provide satisfying career choices for young people.
Let's shift over into Emory University a bit. I read in recent Business to Business magazine, I think the number was $2.5 billion in terms of value and economic development in Atlanta and Georgia through Emory University. And do you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of the contribution that Emory makes to economic development?
Sure. Our contribution, of course, we make direct and indirect contributions. Right. That $2.6 billion is actually Emory's budget, and typically the sort of additional impact that comes out of that can be over twice that amount, closer to $5 billion of economic impact. The direct forms of impact include, well, just the fact that we're a business, the fact that we employ 22,000 folks around the Atlanta metro area in Georgia, and I guess that puts us in the top 2 of private employers.
Right.
That's a very direct impact. The fact that we educate students for the workforce, that's a very direct impact. Emory has a rather interesting role relative to many of the other universities, and together we form a system, of course, in serving Atlanta and Georgia. But our particularly interesting role is we tend to have a student body that's made up of a majority of students from outside the state, but yet a disproportionate number of those students take their first positions in the state. So we're sort of a portal. I think a third direct impact comes from the technology that's developed and transferred, the intellectual property that's developed and transferred. And then, of course, there are a host of indirect impacts, the impact of that universities have in general on quality of life in a region. In the introduction, I noticed they used the phrase that we use here about being a destination university. We could only aspire to that by being in a destination state and a destination city. And quality of life issues are critical. And there are other indirect methods. I think when you tally all those up, the economists like to say that the impact meets or exceeds about $5 billion.
Switching gears a little bit, I have been, of course, we're trying to be students of what's happening in the Georgia area, and it seems to me that over the last couple of years, the governor, the Georgia Department of Economic Development, the Georgia Research Alliance, there's a lot of energy to bring Georgia, and certainly Emory University is part of this, but a lot of energy to bring Georgia into a leadership role in biotech, and I know you have a number of partnerships. Do you see us going in the right direction in terms of biotech for the state?
I do. The Georgia Research Alliance, of course, has been a wonderful way to bring together Georgia's principal research institutions. Of course, there's research going on at other universities as well. And it does appear that there is a special opportunity in Georgia to pursue certain kinds of biomedical research. Emory has a very special partnership with Georgia Tech, which you may be aware. We have a joint graduate department in biomedical engineering. In fact, it's now most recently ranked number 2 in the nation. And it's an interesting program. When you graduate from that program, you get a diploma that has a Georgia Tech seal on it and an Emory seal on it. I think the success of that program demonstrates some of the possibilities here. But I think also the interest that Georgia State has and University of Georgia and the others, Medical College of Georgia and the others engaged in biomedical research seems to be a common theme for all of us. I think a particular focus on disease and antivirals is something that the Georgia Research Alliance in particular is championing. It might be a very good niche for us.
Yeah, I was going to follow up with that because I'm not sure if it's official. You probably can tell me, but I know there was some investment from the state in this area of vaccines. Is that something Emory's? I know GRA is involved with that.
There has been, yes, and yes, there has some welcome and substantial investment. When you think of Atlanta broadly and what it does in the area of disease and healthcare. One could claim, I think, and the phrase has been used that we might want to call ourselves a public health capital of the world. Other partners that are significant in areas like vaccines include the Centers for Disease Control, of course, and when we think about the global impact that we could have, Atlanta is the headquarters for CARE International. The Carter Center, which does a great deal of work in developing nations around disease and infection. There are some very unique partners that can and do come together to make a similarly unique contribution, especially in the area of public and global health.
Now, sometimes there is a little bit of skepticism, I think, at levels of research that there's a lot of energy in the research side, but maybe not as much in the tech transfer side or the commercialization of activities. Is Emory strong in this area? Do you focus on that as a discipline?
The simple answer to your question is yes, but we focus on it because it's a component of social outreach. By that I mean it is wrong, it's morally wrong for a laboratory experiment, particularly when it's successful, just to remain in the archives, in the academic archives, that it needs to get out for use by society. In a free market economy, that's called commercialization. It wasn't that many decades ago that commercialization in academia was a four-letter word. It's understood now to be the mechanism by which we do this. We mentioned vaccines and we mentioned antivirals. I'm not sure the general public's aware of the kind of activity that goes on locally. For example, they're probably not aware that 80% of the prescription drugs written for the management of HIV/AIDS are written for an Emory invention.
I'm sure they're not aware of that.
Well, it's the truth.
Yeah, very good.
And what they may be aware of, because it made quite a splash, is just a couple of years ago, Emory commercialized the next generation antiretroviral drug for management, which is management of HIV/AIDS.
Right. Yeah.
And that was we decided because of where we are in the life cycle of our university, embarking on a pretty bold strategy, that we would auction the intellectual property rights in order to see if we could get as much money as we could get up front rather than have it spread out over the lifetime of a patent. And so there was a significant, the grand total is about $540 million infused into Georgia. And for a brief period, when you asked if Emory is if Emory is a leader in this area, last year Emory was number one among all universities in North America.
Very good.
We'll move back, of course, after that blip to our normal. We're in a top 20 position,
right,
year in and year out. So it's a significant part of what we do, and it's part of our commitment to making a difference with what happens in our laboratories.
I was reading something. We do a state of the industry report here at TAG, and one of our sources of data is the NACE codes and related to patents and the number of patents that the universities produce, and it's still in a leadership position. Is there as much energy, or is it more difficult to attain patents today than it was, say, 10 years ago?
I think there is I think we're going to have to start counting other things than just patents. We need to count successful, marketable patents.
Right.
And so I think, in fact, carrying a large portfolio by patenting every idea and every disclosure, universities end up carrying and prosecuting and defending a large portfolio and expending money that really should be focused on a much smaller portfolio. What modern practice is on campuses, and again, places like Georgia Tech are way up to speed on this as well. Modern practices on campuses are to do a quick evaluation to try to assess the commercialization value, to patent those and prosecute patents on those that are judged to be most likely to have impact, and to return ownership of the others back to the individual researcher for them to pursue individually if they care to. In other words, we're trying to put more of our resources on not just having a patent on the books, but moving it out and partnering with industry to try to get it there. Again, it's as I told you a few minutes ago, there's something improper about leaving a successful experiment on a lab bench.
Right.
Just taking it one more step and leaving a successful idea in a patent portfolio without pursuing its commercialization is also not right.
So more of a productive patenting approach, which makes a lot of sense in terms
Correct.
of...
In fact, universities that have committed to this kind of approach, newly committed to this kind of approach, often see a decrease in the number of patents, and they get and people look at them askance as though their productivity has fallen, when in fact disclosures are still up, and numbers of licenses and new startups and royalties increase. Probably it's those latter metrics that are more important to measure.
So when we do our next State of the Industry report, we'll have to pull in some of this other data.
I would consider it, yes, sir.
Absolutely. Well, before we wrap up, I think because most of our listeners are in the IT area, on the software side, computing side, what's Emory's role in as an innovator in the information technology aspect of?
We have one of our, actually a couple of our initiatives that came out of our recent strategic planning exercise are heavily focused on computational activity. One of them is in predictive health. This is the notion that, or the realization, in fact, that the health care that we practice now is really more disease care. That is, it kicks in once we know we have a disease. Predictive health would be trying to address health matters, health issues, and wellness prior to that. In fact, we've opened a new clinic down in our Midtown campus there where Crawford Long is on wellness. But to really do predictive health, it requires a massive management of massive amounts and searching massive amounts of patient data. This is something we'll be doing jointly with Georgia Tech. On our own campus, we have put in place. In fact, we just putting in place a new cluster, computing cluster that I believe it's 1024 CPU cluster to help us with some of our in-house computational needs, and chemistry, neurology, genetics, and the predictive health folks. In fact, even library science will take advantage of that, and it puts us. We didn't shoot for the moon on this one. This puts us among the top 400 or 500 in terms of computing capability centers. In terms of computing capability centers, But other areas of computing technology, we have been investing over the years in a project which I believe wraps up this year or next in advanced electronic medical records to increase efficiency and enable healthcare providers to make, best decisions about patients and to try to increase safety and reduce cost. So there are, and I mentioned predictive health as one. We also have a program in computational and life sciences that's an initiative, again, we're doing in partnership, but again, computer intensive. So we are, I would say we are creative users of computer technology and creators of software. We are not, lacking an engineering school, we are not creators of new hardware.
Right.
And new computing technology in that sense.
Well, very good. Well, we've been talking with Dr. James Wagner of Emory University. Dr. Wagner, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk today.
You're most welcome, Tina. It was my pleasure.